early 90s was some of the most interesting times for video games, with both innovation and how companies really felt about each other. You get fanboy wars today where people who love Xbox hate PlayStation and vice versa, but at the end of the day, all these companies are gonna shake each other's hands. Whereas back in the early 90s, it wasn't like that. Sega literally had a campaign dedicated to bashing the Super Nintendo. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Sega was very upset by the fact that Nintendo had pretty much put a stymie on the third-party market when it came to the NES and the Master System, where companies couldn't put their games, their third-party titles, on the Sega Master System if they released them on the NES. Obviously, the NES was more successful than the Master System was in the States, so it really hurt Sega's marketplace. But as the Sega Genesis came around, times changed. And times changing also talks about the way video games were sort of created and looked at as far as an entertainment medium. Of course, Mortal Kombat was one of the biggest controversies of the early 90s. An arcade game that featured digitized sprites fighting against each other with brutal finishing moves called fatalities. Parents were scared. Congress was scared. Everyone was scared. There were news reports on how this would impact children because video games were only looked at a children's medium. It was a satanic panic from Dungeons and Dragons all over again, but on a much larger scale. Of course, Mortal Kombat ended up coming to home systems with Mortal Monday back in 1993. And this game released on both the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And this is really where Sega managed to stick it to Nintendo, really giving them a middle finger saying, hey, we're the cool system and you guys are the fuddy-duddies. Howard Lincoln was of course head of Nintendo of America as the president during that time frame, and he was very outspoken in Congress when Congress was talking about things like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, saying games like Night Trap for the Sega CD would never come to a Nintendo platform. How did that age? I'm playing it on my Nintendo Switch nowadays. Of course, Nintendo tried to go on the moral high ground and try to make Sega look as bad as humanly possible. But if anything, it made Sega look cooler than Nintendo, and being cool was all that mattered in video game perspective in the early 90s. Mortal Kombat released on both the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and people were quick to figure out which was the better version. Sure, the Super Nintendo version of the game technically looked a little bit better. It honestly sounded a bit better, but gameplay is king at the end of the day, and if you're missing core components from a game that really sort of make this game completely different, people are going to notice that. Sega, on the other hand, was much more true to the arcade experience when it came to gameplay, and this all boils down to two different things: blood and fatalities. Mortal Kombat was a notoriously bloody game, and Super Nintendo owners were quick to find out that their version of the game had no blood. Instead, you had little balls of sweat that would fly off the opponents. Now, call me crazy, but I would rather see blood flying around than, of course, sweat flying around. Really, Mortal Kombat, it wasn't the greatest game in the world, but it was doing something different. It was marching to the beat of its own drum, and really showing that video games weren't just a child-based medium. But over on the Sega Genesis, there was indeed a way to access blood. A menu would come up early before the game would even start that was basically talking about like warriors and weird stuff like that, and at that menu you could press A, B, A, C, A, B, B, the blood code for Mortal Kombat on Sega Genesis, and voila! An uncensored version of Mortal Kombat was available on home consoles, filled with blood and, yes, all of the fatalities. The Super Nintendo had like weird redone sort of fatalities that really weren't fatalities, whereas the Sega Genesis version of the game, you were burning people with Scorpion, doing the kiss of death with Sonya Blade, of course doing things with Raiden, the electricity on the head, bah, your head gets exploded. It was absolutely amazing. And I guess Nintendo and their hubris at the time didn't think that this would really make a huge difference. Oh, people are still going to support the Super Nintendo. It'll be fine. But no, that wasn't indeed the case. The Sega Genesis version absolutely crushed the Super Nintendo sanitized version in terms of sales. And this was really a turning point for Nintendo, and at that time Sega, that I feel like Nintendo still has trouble shaking off to this day: the kiddie perspective. Now, in retrospect, when you look at the Super Nintendo, there was a ton of violent games on the system. There was Doom, there was Wolfenstein, and of course subsequent versions of Mortal Kombat, such as 2 and beyond, did have all the blood and the fatalities of the original Mortal Kombat. But a stigma was given to Nintendo with that situation, that they were trying to protect the kids and tell you what you could and couldn't see in a video game, whereas Sega instantly had the cool factor. Mortal Kombat played a huge role in this as well. Mortal Kombat featured 8 different characters that you could choose from, and of course, most of them were ninja based. There was Kano, there was Liu Kang, there was a story, you had to beat Shang Tsung and Goro. It really, at its core, wasn't necessarily a great fighting game. I honestly think that Street Fighter 2 is technically the better fighting game, but in terms of visuals, in terms of doing something unique, in terms of really standing out, Mortal Kombat was the bee's knees. Mortal Kombat also had secrets within the game, such as characters that only under certain conditions you could actually access and fight against, such as Reptile. And like, this just led to so much speculation. This led to so many people wondering, what other characters are there? Are there other hidden characters? There was rumors on the playground about nudalities, which never was a thing, but supposedly there was a certain button combination that you could press on a certain arcade version of the original Mortal Kombat that would make Sonya take off her top. There was all sorts of stuff, and this really all stemmed from the fact that Mortal Kombat was more than just a fighting game. Mortal Kombat was really a way of life for some people because it was different. It really did something different in the home video game arcade market as far as fighting games were concerned. Street Fighter and games like that were known for their competitive aspect and people lining up in arcades, but people lined up to play Mortal Kombat for different reasons. They wanted to see the brutality. They wanted to see the violence unleashed. And honestly, I would rather have somebody see that instead of, experiencing it in real life, but hey, that's just me. I'm not a senator or a congressman. Screw you, Senator Joseph Lieberman. You lost the war, buddy. You lost the war. But I always think back to this time frame of video games because I just loved it. I loved the competition aspect. I loved all of the stories that came out from these situations and all of the decisions that companies made that either hurt or helped their vision of a company. You got to remember, the Sega brand was actually bigger than Nintendo was in North America at one point in time. Sonic the Hedgehog was a bigger character than Mario, and today you might think that's absolutely crazy to say, but there was a time when this was actually factually correct as far as Sega was doing. And you gotta wonder, what if? What if Sega managed to keep that momentum with the Sega Saturn? They didn't completely screw it up. Sega had a million problems, but when it came to Mortal Kombat, this is a story that I love thinking about. It's just such a fascinating tale about how one decision can just potentially give you a moniker for the rest of your life. For the rest of your existence, Nintendo will always be sort of looked at a little bit like a kiddie sort of company, and it really stems from this situation. So I hope you enjoyed this little stroll down memory lane about how Sega really stuck it to Nintendo and really made themselves look like the cool company when it came to the original Mortal Kombat. And like I said, Mortal Kombat games after that were, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. They were all arguably better on the Super Nintendo in terms of graphics, in terms of, all that sort of stuff, that the controls were a little bit tighter and they had all the blood and fatalities. But you also have to wonder, well, what if the Super Nintendo version did have everything intact? Would Sega have been viewed as the cool brand? And what would that sort of mean for the future of Nintendo? A lot of what ifs in that situation. I hope you guys enjoyed this video though. Let me know what you think of it in the comment section down below. If you have any fond memories of playing the original Mortal Kombat, I love firing up this game from time to time and just going back to little 8-year-old RGT and ripping people's heads off. Well, my mom made me return Mortal Kombat to the store, but I ended up getting Mortal Kombat 2 when I was older and that game came out. So in the end, I really won. And as always, guys, thank you for visiting RGT85's Retro Stash. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.